I'm delighted to be back and tell you about Naturalist this evening. This is an app that I had signed up to start using years ago, but kind of dragged my feet, didn't get really around to it. But especially since I've been here in Kentucky, I started using this quite a bit, both personally and also forcing my students to get out and engage with nature. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that some of the information from this presentation I got from Chuck Peterson, who's a professor emeritus at Idaho State University. This ends up on the internet. I'm going to give Chuck proper credit on some of the ideas that he used in his presentation. I had originally learned about iNaturalist through him. He was also very involved with spreading the word about iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is particularly important these days because our world is changing. It's changing, as far as we're aware, more rapidly than it has changed in the last 65 or 66 million years. This is largely through anthropogenic sources of change. So humans are converting land uses. We're overexploiting a number of resources. We've contributed large amounts of pollution to the land, sea, and air. The climate is changing. We have a number of diseases, both zoonotic, right, so they're specific to wildlife and also within human populations. And we've managed to shuffle species around, so we have a number of invasive species, but also changing the composition of our ecosystems. Oh. It's like I added the animation to the wrong slide, or to the wrong picture. So this is a figure showing the percent of species within each taxonomic group on their conservation status. So all these, let's see, this purple little blip on the screen would be the proportion of that type of organism that's gone extinct in the wild. We have critically endangered species highlighted in red, and if we go to the right, orange is just only endangered. Yellow species would be vulnerable. We have these gray bars that are data deficient, so there's not enough information to determine the status of those species. We have near threatened in this kind of light green, and then the bright green would be species of least concern. So about here is where the black box was supposed to show up. This is to draw your attention. I realize these words are probably small for you. We have birds on this top bar. We have reptiles on the second bar from the bottom, and then mammals on the lower bar. So we can see that the proportion of birds and mammals that are in that endangered, critically endangered, or extinct in the wild category is relatively low compared to the proportions of organisms like amphibians and some of the fishes. But there are big chunks of gray, right, even in what we might classically think of as wildlife, or in these kind of large charismatic animals. So these portions of gray are species that we just don't have enough information on in terms of their distribution or how their populations are doing to adequately discern what their conservation status should be. So I have a quote here from Todd Wilkinson. It says, "Without quality data, problems go undetected." And so really this figure is showing not only are there a number of different species that are in some form of distress in terms of their conservation status, but there's also nearly as many species where we're not sure where they stand in terms of if they should be considered endangered or of least concern. So if we're going to try to figure out how it is that we can get more information about these species, there are a number of sources we can look to in terms of getting a better idea of where our wild critters are. We can look at peer-reviewed scientific literature for some sense. Of course, those are going to be specific to the species that are studied. We can look at museum collections for information in terms of which species have been collected where. We can look at survey data, both in state and federal agencies, as well as in academia. We seek information from universities. When there's a fourth avenue, we can get contributed observations. So these don't necessarily have to be from professional scientists or professional biologists, but even from members of the general public at large. It turns out that can be critically important in terms of getting a better sense of how our wild things are. So iNaturalist is an app that actually works in this interspace in between using crowdsourcing and citizen science data to help create a more holistic picture of how our natural world is doing. So if you're unfamiliar, crowdsourcing, this can be the practice of obtaining information by enlisting the services of many people. So you can think of like Google reviews of some product, right? You have lots and lots of reviews. You should have, as long as there's no bots involved, you should have some idea of how good a product you would be getting, right, based on those reviews. Let's see, a definition for citizen science. This would be the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the public. So citizen science has gotten a lot more attention here in the last few decades. But it turns out the concept of having citizen scientists is centuries old. In the 1700s, Uranus was discovered by a citizen scientist. Here in the United States, Benjamin Franklin is often lauded as an example of a citizen scientist. Franklin had done all sorts of things, and science was only a small part of the contributions that Franklin made to society. On this figure, we have a number of different disciplines that made use of citizen science. We have a publication year on along the bottom. So the larger the circles we see, the more publications there are in each of those particular fields they're either discussing citizen science or they're relying on data that's been collected through citizen science. Up on the top, we have biology, we have conservation, and some computing and political science and so on. At least for our talk here, we're most concerned with the biology and the conservation, and we can see this really is where the biggest of the circles are. And those circles just get bigger and bigger as we go up and to the right. So these are lots of instances where citizen science is appearing in the scientific literature, both as a topic of conversation, but then also, importantly, as a source of information to inform the science and inform conservation. So it turns out that over 2,000 peer-reviewed scientific publications have been published, especially in the last few decades here. They specifically list iNaturalist as a data source. The majority of these papers are going to be in topics of ecology, conservation, and also climate change. Some other topics include examining how the home ranges, or I guess not the home range, but the range in which species occur are shifting through time, presumably in response to climate change. So these can be species ranges that are shrinking or expanding due to climate change. iNaturalist has contributed to the description of new species or the rediscovery of species that were previously presumed to be extinct. And then we also have descriptions of morphology or coloration of species collected from observations on iNaturalist. So generally speaking, not just with citizen science and crowdsourcing, but in data in general, oftentimes we have issues with identifying organisms accurately. We might have problems with obtaining accurate location data. And then also, particularly in terms of getting information from the general public to interested parties within science or state and federal agencies, the convenience of submission of that information can be a problem as well. So iNaturalist is able to overcome these challenges in a number of different ways. So for identification accuracy, iNaturalist is an app that relies on photographic evidence or sound recording of an organism so that it can be identified by other users. So that helps diminish the issue with identification accuracy. In terms of getting reliable location data, iNaturalist relies on GPS information collected from your phone. If you happen to want to upload some observation of an organism from a camera that was not attached to a GPS device, then you're able to actually go onto a map and pinpoint where the information was collected from. And then also in terms of the convenience of the submission, if you are using your mobile device to upload information, then it's literally just a matter of pushing 2 or 3 buttons on your screen in that supercomputer that you often have in your pocket anyway. So it's incredibly easy. So iNaturalist was an application designed to help connect people with nature. It's a social network of naturalists, of citizen scientists, and even professional biologists that's used for the mapping and sharing of biodiversity observations. It really is as simple as taking a picture of some organism, or taking an audio recording of it, hitting a few buttons to upload it into the cloud and make it publicly available to the community at large. So iNaturalist can be accessed through its website or through mobile apps. There are apps for both iPhone and also Android devices. And about 350,000 users are active within the last 30 days. That's more than 1/3 people just in the last month have used iNaturalist. iNaturalist is not the product of some Silicon Valley billionaires who are seeking to exploit all of your personal information, unlike other social media platforms might be. Instead, iNaturalist originally began as a master's project from a student at UC Berkeley, out of California. In 2014, iNaturalist was acquired by the California Academy of Sciences. And then in 2018, they became co-sponsored by the National Geographic Society. See, also in 2018, it says Seek was released. So Seek is another related app that relies on a similar platform, but with some differences we'll talk about a little bit later. So iNaturalist uses those mobile devices to document observations of organisms. This includes birds, mammals, reptiles, even some microscopic organisms, fungi, really just about anything you can get a picture of, whether it's through a microscope or it's bigger and you can just use right with your iPhone. When you're creating an observation in iNaturalist, you need either a photograph or an audio recording, like I mentioned. So unlike platforms like eBird, where you're able to just make a list of the birds that you've seen or the birds that you've heard, iNaturalist relies on some sort of evidence rather than just I heard it or I saw it. So this can make it a little difficult, right, if you have to chase something down to try and get a picture of it. But it does lend itself to more credibility in terms of identifying organisms and having some evidence of their presence. Let's see, the observations also, in order to be considered research grade, should have geographic coordinates. You are able to have a casual observation, which may not have the same utility in terms of being used by science. Let's see, You'd also make some sort of tentative identification. So if you're able to identify the organism, even if you don't know the species, but you can say it's a rodent or it's a mammal, any sort of tentative identification ultimately will help increase the likelihood of being identified to a more specific taxonomic level, such as species or subspecies. And if you have any specific comments to make about the observation, there's a field in the observation information to list comments. So maybe something about the habitat where you observe the organism or other things that were nearby, whatever might help. And then of course these observations are easily shared with other people and organizations. You just hit upload and your information gets sent off into the cloud somewhere between here in California or wherever their data center is. So I mentioned there was iNaturalist and Seek. These are both the different applications with somewhat similar uses. There's some overlap. So while iNaturalist is an online community that allows you to share observations to discuss, identify, and create research quality citizen science data, Seek in some ways is kind of like an introductory level to iNaturalist. So this can be for more casual use, especially you can allow users of all ages. You can earn badges, you can complete challenges to go find specific types of organisms that are, should be present in your area. Then Seek also, it uses artificial intelligence to identify the organisms that you're viewing. So rather than you needing to provide some sort of tentative identification, you can get that identification through Seek. And then you choose whether or not to upload that to the iNaturalist data. So you can just run around, take pictures of things, upload it to Seek, or not even upload it, it will never leave your device. You can just hit identify and Seek, and it will tell you within some degree of margin of error what it is that you're looking at. So iNaturalist is the best choice to connect with others, to share data, and to contribute to citizen science, whereas the Seek app would be best choice to avoid creating an account, avoid sharing data. It's more of a casual approach of interacting with the organisms in your environment. Let's see, in order to use iNaturalist, you're supposed to be 13 years or older to make an account. Seek there's no login or account required, so it makes it much more kid safe, although the users are supposed to be 13 plus or used with parents' permission. Let's see, the identification model used by iNaturalist is really reliant on humans. So when you upload photos that you've created as an observation, it gets reviewed by other iNaturalist users, right? So anybody who's using iNaturalist is welcome to identify pictures from other users, and in that way, it encourages kind of a social network of users interacting with other users, reviewing their observations. Whereas Seek is really reliant on real-time identification through that artificial intelligence. So in iNaturalist, those observations become biodiversity data and they can contribute immediately to citizen science. Whereas in Seek, I mentioned that it's more of a casual platform, and so the observations never leave your device. You don't need an internet connection to use Seek. So iNaturalist, you have used photos, used your location data, and the time for each of your observations. In the Seek application, there's no personally identifiable information that's collected. You don't need to log in. Just point your camera at stuff and find out what you're looking at. I mentioned that iNaturalist originally began in 2008 as a master's program. I don't have any screenshots to show you the very small number of observations, but each of these gray blobs here, as of 3.5 years ago, right? So this is March of 2019. These were the observations and the distribution of them across the globe. And you can see that unless you're up really high in the Arctic or in the Sahara, there's pretty good coverage across the globe for areas where iNaturalist users have been. So at this point, 3.5 years ago, there were more than 16 million, almost 17 million observations made. This was describing the distribution of over 200,000 species, or almost 205,000 species. This information was collected by 451,000 observers, and almost 67,000 people worked to identify all those different observations down to some sort of taxonomic level. But this is an old hat, right? That's 3.5 years ago. We can fast forward to last night, around 9:30. We're up to over 17 million observations. So I don't know how much of this is an effect of the pandemic or just the app becoming more popular and getting more visibility, more usage, but the observations that are describing our biodiversity have just skyrocketed in the last few years. So now we have almost 400,000 species represented in the iNaturalist data. We have almost 2.5 million users, and more than 250,000 people have worked to identify those observations. I didn't get a chance to actually do the math. This was actually, here's a screenshot from this morning, and let's see, there are a few hundred more species that were identified just in the 12 hours in between these two screenshots. We have, I think it's a few more identifiers and a few thousand more observers just in the last few 12 hours or so. Since, I guess the last picture is almost 24 hours old now, and this one is about 10 hours, so I imagine these numbers have gone up even more. We can zoom in on that map specific to the Owensboro area, and I realize the map underneath this is terrible and you probably can't see anything. But these clusters of orange, right? So each orange dot would represent an observation that's been uploaded into the cloud for iNaturalist. This larger orange blob is the Evansville area, and then this smaller orange blob is the Owensboro area. So this is what the map of observations looked like March of 2021. And you can see March of 2021, there were only 60 million observations uploaded. We've nearly doubled that in the last year and a half. We can look at Owensboro as of this January. So this is 10 months later. Again, the big orange blob is Evansville, and we can see that the blob around Owensboro is filling in. Here we can fast forward to, is that this morning? Yeah, this is this morning. Of course, iNaturalist changed their map. We can actually see some roads now. But here we see Owensboro is filling in. A lot of this interstitial space in between towns is filling in. Evansville is filled out quite a bit. And, Owensboro is working on catching up there. So I had really enjoyed uploading observations and sharing the organisms that I saw for quite some time, but especially here recently, I've really started doing lots of identifications for other people. So see, completing an identification of iNaturalist data is actually very easy. As far as I know, it's either very difficult to do this on the mobile app, or it's not convenient enough. But it is very easy and convenient to do on a computer. So if you go to the iNaturalist website, you click that you want to identify some organisms, and it will take you to a page with thousands and thousands of photos that have been uploaded, and these are usually in chronological order so that the most recent observations are up front, and as you go further down you get to older and older observations. you click on a tab to say that you, or to apply filters. So typically, I restrict the observations that I want to really pay attention to birds and to mammals. That way I don't have to weed through all the plants that I don't know before I get to something that I can recognize. You can apply another filter to reduce it to a specific area. So you can look at just Kentucky, just Owensboro. I usually look at all of North America. That way I have more organisms to pick from. So here we have lots of different tiles of, these are primarily birds that have been observed. And this was earlier this morning, because this was what was on the iNaturalist feed. I think I scrolled down 1 or 2 rows beyond this picture. Right, I just clicked on one of the pictures. The original user, or the person who uploaded this, thought that they were looking at a chipping sparrow. So when you look at the picture, well, I know what a chipping sparrow looks like. That was a chipping sparrow. So I just hit the button here to say that I agree with their tentative identification. Oh, I thought I had a slide up here of me having agreed. Once 2/3 of the people who have made suggestions agree on the identification of a species, then that observation would go from the needs ID status to research grade. And so at that point it becomes a research grade observation. Folks are able to kind of sift through all of the biodiversity information and determine which research grade observations they'd like to pick from. So you can refine it into a specific project and curate your data set from there. Let's see, this is a screenshot of a white-tailed deer that I identified not too terribly long ago, so maybe a day ago. All right, so these, we see there's actually 3 different photos that were uploaded, but we can tell just by looking at the structure of the antlers there, and also the geographic location. So this is in Virginia. That's a white-tailed deer. That's what the user had suggested, white-tailed deer as an identification. And then I agreed that was a white-tailed deer. Another user agreed that it was white-tailed deer. And so here in this green bar, we see that more than 2/3 of the users who have suggested an identification all agree that's a white-tailed deer. And so this observation becomes, because it has the location data, it has a photo, and enough people agree on what it is that we're looking at, and that becomes a research grade observation. So now we can be reasonably sure that there are in fact white-tailed deer in Delicious Road, Linden, Virginia. Now this is not something that just happens far away. I was very excited this spring for my biodiversity class. I had all of my students go out and I cracked the whip and I made them get out, engage with nature, and observe some organisms. I had them collect observations for iNaturalist. But it would be unfair, right, if I just made my students do it without doing it myself. So I went out, I bit the bullet on that one. I just, made myself go outside and look at some nature. It was actually at Joe Ford Nature Center. I took this picture. I had no idea what I was looking at. And honestly, I don't even know if I'd really recognize it again if I saw it. So I took my picture. I looked at the suggestions that iNaturalist had for what it was I was looking at. I always, if I'm just going to guess, I always guess in a big taxonomic group. Rather than being very specific and incredibly wrong with what it is I'm guessing. Right? If I guess in a big group, cast a wide net, there's better chances of me getting it right. But that way, right, by casting that wide net, I can help other people who actually do know what scorpion weeds look like, compare my photo to their knowledge and get an accurate identification of it. So in this case, Vicki Volker from the Kentucky Native Plant Society saw my photo. she determined that it is a type of scorpion weed. More specifically, it's ocean blue Phacelia. So Vicki helped me identify this to the species level rather than just the genus level. She also sent a message, and her message says, "Hi, I'm a botanist with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves." Oh, excuse me, I misspoke on her affiliation. She's the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves. She just wanted to mention that this is a species with a conservation status of special concern in Kentucky. She says, "I don't believe we previously had a record of this species occurring in Davis County, so if you see it again in the area, please feel free to tag me in the observation." She says she frequently uses iNaturalist observations to make updates to their rare species database. She says, "Thanks."
Oh, wow.
So that was really exciting. I dug around online, and ocean blue Phacelia is known to occur in 7 counties kind of along the Ohio River, right in the western and southernmost Kentucky. So we actually, with this data, added an 8th county that this plant now occurs in. I wasn't the only one that found this. Actually, one of my students also came across this. I believe it was in Yellow Creek. A student just took this photo, right? It's just the leaves, doesn't even have a flower on it. I would do even more terribly at identifying this is what it is. But once again, Vicki Volker knew exactly what she was looking at. She says, "Nice work. Ocean blue Phacelia is a rare species in Kentucky with the conservation status of special concern." She says, "Thanks for documenting this population. This observation came after mine, so I got to find it first." Braylon did a great job of expanding that range even more, but her observation was also in Davis County. Let's see, if you have any questions or if you wanted to poke around with iNaturalist, I'd be happy to help you. That's all I have to share with you tonight about iNaturalist beyond any input you have.
Is this a free app?
Yes, it is free. Yes.
If you're looking for a specific species, can you go to that and say, is there this in this county?
Yes.
Does it do that? It does that as well?
Yeah, and so actually,
We got any armadillos listed for Davis County?
I don't know. I just saw one, a dead one on the side of the road laying between the lakes.
There was a big one here 2 weeks ago over the bypass.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Let's see, I have a Wi-Fi connection here, if it works.
There's a man falling off a truck too, you never know about armadillos.
Yeah. Or maybe got brought over with a load of lumber.
They got here to West Kentucky by falling off semis coming out of the south.
Last September, there was a live one in Deer Valley subdivision.
Great.
And a dead one right in front of Walgreens on President.
That's good.
My.
We had a few in Richmond back in the day when I was there, but they didn't come there by themselves.
You what?
We had a few in Richmond, and they,
Yeah.
the colleagues there.
People used to carry them up this way.
They got, yeah, few of them made it during spring
Would it
breaks.
also track white nose, the bat? Oh,
That's good.
You'd have to have a photo of an infected bat in order to document that. Let's see, so you can just explore the data, and here we'll see a map like the maps I showed you previously. But we can search for specific species, we can search for a specific location. So if you want to see all of the places that the 9-banded armadillo has been observed, so this is just armadillo, and I think this is going incredibly slowly. You have to beg your patience. There's 9-banded armadillos. We can see lots of them in the southern United States, all the way down into South America. So we can zoom in. So there are no observations in Owensboro, but we can see
Looks
that
like
just...
2 in Kentucky, maybe 3.
I'm sorry?
Looks like 2 in Kentucky, maybe 3.
So Kentucky is it's kind of this whole space, and so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, easily 2 dozen or so. More, a lot of, looks like most of them are just west of, west of Clarksville, south of Paducah, kind of next to the lakes.
And that's land between the lakes.
Mhm.
John, I think you inspired the group. There's gonna be someone in this room in the next week or two that's gonna upload a article.
Well, good, I hope so, because, this is a species that didn't occur here historically, and so it's an expansion of the range. If they're expanding, we should know, right? And it'd be great to know the hows and the whys of it, but knowing that it exists is at least a step in the right
Ask them how
direction.
it got here.
What we
We
first
can't
started seeing in
interview.
the '70s along the interstate, we figured they were falling off semis coming out of the south. That's how some of them were getting there on open
Makes sense.
semi-truck trailers. They'd ride along for so long and they'd fall off.
Get cold and
Get cold. That was back in the '70s when they started showing up West Kentucky area.
John, I have a question too, like,
Okay.
but like sometimes alligators are released in Indiana, Kentucky, or like,
Mhm.
what is it, 4 or 5 years ago, all these animals escaped from a zoo in Ohio. Is that kind of fixed later on, like, because the alligator could be in the Ohio River, but it was released, that just stays in observation, or I'm just curious? Because it's still there, it's still observed.
So let's see, one of the ways that might be accounted for, and I'm not a curator, so I'm not certain how they deal with some of these issues. But people will upload photos of themselves or photos of their dog, photo of their cat, right? So iNaturalist is primarily intended to document wild organisms, not your landscaping, right? Not your pet. So let's see, we'll just click on the identify. I'll search for a human.
Be curious how they handle somebody who's just photoshopping just to be honorary,
Mm.
Just to get some fake photo in as an observation.
Ooh, a jackalope.
We can always.
I'm thinking that often when we're out birding, we're walking along, we see some fungi and we say, does anybody know what that is? Nobody knows what that is. Or you see a wildflower or a plant that's unusual, nobody knows what it is. So this
Yeah.
would be a good way to deal with that.
Absolutely. In fact, that's at least my intent behind uploading a lot of the photos of plants is because I ain't from around here, so I don't know what a lot of the plants are.
Well,
But
the
I'm
other thing
curious.
is that they don't move.
No.
You
No,
know? You
that's
can
good.
take a picture of them.
Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Are there pictures of nuts that fall from trees
Yes.
in here?
Mm-hmm.
Because my son lives in eastern Tennessee, and he brought in a nut that had fallen on his, among hundreds of them apparently that fell in his yard. He didn't know what they were, and I didn't have a clue. This would be a nice way to find out what it is. Although if I showed it to somebody, they might know, but I certainly don't.
And I use Seek a lot. I don't have Naturalist yet, but for both, Seek gives you immediate sort of some satisfaction, although it's not great at accuracy, but it gives you some immediate satisfaction of getting a genus or area or if not specific name. And then you can take a picture of it and then use iNaturalist and then reconfirm what you have. If you
So
have
you
it on
could,
your
you
phone.
could check it out on Seek and then submit it to iNaturalist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can decide whether or not to upload it. And they are working to improve the identification abilities of Seek. Right? So it's an evolving process. Here's a picture of a dog that somebody took out in Utah. I'm pretty confident that's a dog, so I hit agree. So now I've agreed. I can also mark this as a captive or cultivated organism. Right, so this is a dog that belongs to somebody. It looks like it's wearing a red collar. So I can hit captive. So now, instead of being a research grade observation, it's casual. So this would likely not be included in a data set that somebody would download. So you can do this also for cultivated plants. Let's see. Of course, if you're taking a picture of is it the Asian lace tree, the mimosa, is that what its name is? Right, that's an invasive species, right? So it's escaped cultivation, escaped captivity, and so if you're taking a picture of a tree in somebody's yard, it might get marked as captive or cultivated, as opposed to taking a picture in the woods somewhere and it would be marked as a wild plant.
Is it, for example, the dogwood. There's dogwood in the woods, and along the parkways, and then there are the dogwoods that people plant along the Dogwood and Azalea Trail.
Right.
Would they be able to determine which species they were?
I think some of that might be the context of where it's occurring and what's visible in the background.
And I think pink is not natural, so,
Right.
I mean, they're not wild, so.
But if it's growing somewhere wild, that would be different than if somebody had intentionally planted it in their yard.
You mentioned, it's not as easy on a mobile device. I mean, we don't take our computers with us.
Mhm. Well, so the act of creating an observation, like taking the photo and uploading it, is much easier on a mobile device than it is on a
So you
computer.
send it from your phone to your computer and then go with that.
Yeah, so this would, if you're creating an observation, you're uploading it, then it goes to your account in iNaturalist. But then if you wanted to identify organisms, then that's much easier on the laptop or on a desktop computer.
But I'm just saying you don't have it, I guess I'm not following that.
No, you did miss
I
one.
did miss a point, okay. So you upload it from your phone?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, right, that's what I said, okay.
Yeah, and so you're able to engage with your profile and with your account. You can see all the observations you've made. You can see whether somebody has made other identifications of your observations. You can see if somebody has commented on your observations. Just strictly in terms of trying to contribute identifications of things. So like here, I pulled up. I shudder to think how many dogs this is. There's, I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of pages of photos that people have identified as a dog. Especially at the beginning of the semester, you'll see lots of students posting pictures of themselves and saying that they're a walrus or an elephant or I don't know, a seal. Use your imagination, any animal, and students will call themselves that. So you can be scouring, trying to make real observations or real identifications. That is definitely not an elephant.
Hey, John?
Do those get taken down or no?
They
just
get corrected by the community.
I see.
So the other users identify it actually as a human, and then I think the humans are usually disregarded.
John?
Yes.
I just did a search on my app and I get iNaturalist and iNaturalist.org. Which do you recommend?
So iNaturalist.org is the website. So you're saying you see that like on the
I went to my app store,
App Store?
and just did a search and I typed in iNaturalist. I get iNaturalist, but I also get iNaturalist.org.
So iNaturalist would be.
Did you get this at the store?
The App Store.
You
in
did
terms
this
of
at
like
the App Store.
suggestions.
Yeah,
to-
which one is?
I would think that they're the same.
Okay.
Let's see, I just pulled up iNaturalist and that is iNaturalist. And I get the same results with iNaturalist.org.
Thank you.
But when you go to the App Store, then you'll get
No,
the app
that's
instead of the
what he
website.
said.
And
That's
just
where I
Google
am.
it.
That's what he said there.
Yeah, and so actually just seeking or just searching for iNaturalist, seek also comes up as an option. Right underneath picture this, which I assume that's an advertisement.
Well, picture this is, I think another
It's a more of a plan ID.
But a photo
platform.
thing, you just take a
Yeah.
picture of it, it tells you what, yeah.
They cost $20 a year.
Yeah, you get some free ones, 10 free ones or something.
Yeah, and they have in-app purchases for you. So iNaturalist is entirely free. I think you have the option to be a contributing member. So I see you can donate money to iNaturalist if you choose to, and you get a special badge on your profile saying that you've been a contributing member since whenever you signed up. But it's not mandatory in any means, and I've never gotten any notifications saying that, boy, we sure would like it if you contributed. I'm sure they would like it, but it's never been pushed on me. Yes?
When we do the citizen science things, like the Christmas bird count, for
Mhm.
example, one of our dilemmas often is that we're counting birds and then we go a mile down the road and we see another flock of the same species and we don't know if it's a bird that just flown circles around us or whether there's a new flock of birds.
Yeah.
How do they control for that kind of thing with this?
As far as I know, they don't. So I think
For example, if you take your ornithology class to Rudy Mines.
Yeah.
And, you've got Amy's taking a picture of a blue jay, and then, 500 feet down the road, Joe takes a picture of a blue jay.
Mhm.
They are in a different geotagging spot,
Right.
but they might be the same bird.
Well, so that's one of the limitations of iNaturalist is that these organisms are not marked as individuals typically. I guess there are some species where it'd be easier to identify individuals than others. So there are limitations to the types of analyses that can be done and how they can do it. I mean, you can definitively say, yes, there is a blue jay here in this specific spot at this specific time. But you can't necessarily get a good count of how many blue jays are there.
Well, when they're looking at data and saying this is a species of concern,
Mm-hmm.
it has to do with the frequency of observation.
Yes, and that is one of the biases that's recognized in the data. There is a relationship between how common species are, how easily observed they are, and how often they show up in the data set.
Right, I mean, they wouldn't get all bent out of shape about two blue jays, so
No,
I
no,
understand.
and when I take students, like I had students in my ornithology class 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, that were also in my biodiversity course, and so they would go on birding field trips and they'd have their iNaturalist app and they would take photos of stuff, and I'd have to kind of shoo them away, like one observation per organism, please.
Okay.
'Cause-
Well, it's like when I do Project Feeder Watch, you can only count 2 cardinals if you see those 2 cardinals in the same frame.
Yeah.
Because they want to account for birds flying in and out of the feeder,
Mhm.
out of your feeder range. So I was just curious as to how they manage that.
So let's see. I remember on one of my field trips, we were actually at Virginia Miles, and I think it was a garter snake that we came across in the trail. And so immediately I had 3 students pulled out their phone, they're all taking pictures of the same snake. But then even within the data, you would see 3 very similar photos of a garter snake all at the same location at the
Right,
same
they
time.
want to be geotagged to the same location.
Yeah, and even if it was a few meters off, just because of the error in GPS, I think you can't typically get a good count of species in an area, and so it may not even be an issue other than to know that that snake occurs in that area.
It strikes me that if there are so few to be of concern, even if they are more than once, they're still few. Does that make sense? No.
If there's a species of concern,
Yeah, Judy was saying that, how do they figure out
Mhm.
it's a species of concern? If you count, if you see a bunch of robins, okay, and you see only 3 of something else, even if that 3 is still the same one, there's still not many of them. Even if it's 20, it's still not many of them. Even if it's 5, if you're wrong, it's still a small number.
Oh, so,
You would never get hundreds.
yeah, this data would not be used, or I would say wouldn't likely be used directly to make a determination of like a conservation status. To like,
Okay.
you wouldn't use this to decide if an organism should be listed as endangered, but it can help point biologists and conservation biologists in the right direction of where to look for organisms, or maybe they're showing up in a new area, or maybe in the case of that ocean blue Phacelia, maybe folks, if they had ever looked in Davis County, they didn't find it, but now they know at least 2 different areas where they actually can go and do some more structured and rigorous survey for those organisms and get a better idea of what the population is.
So the fact that she said it's a plan of concern
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that she got that information from this tool.
No.
And
no.
probably not.
It had already been previously listed as a species of concern, and just that it has a very limited range within the state. And in fact, there's only a few states that species exists in. So we just nudged the border of where it occurs a little bit.
Yeah, we had kind of along the lines, the Copper-bellied water snake they were gonna try to list it, I don't know, gosh, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And just because very few observations were known of this particular species. But once the issue of possibly listing it came into the light, all of a sudden, a whole lot of folks got out looking. And all of a sudden, well, these things are a lot more common than we thought they were.
Yeah.
So the need drove, and the snake, of course, did not get listed anyway. Because of the, people got out looking and found the thing.
Yeah, I think there are enough threats to not just wildlife, but I mean, like, that's my bias, right? My background is wildlife, so I'm going to say wildlife, but wild plants, wild animals, whatever the organisms are, there are enough threats to them that it really, it's unfortunate that we have to spend our limited resources trying to figure out which species are really in the most dire need, rather than making steps to engage in those conservation actions. So like in the case of the snake, you were saying, if we know that people are uploading pictures of the snake all over the place, then that speaks to how relatively common they might be. And let's see. I would say, so Chuck Peterson, the guy who had introduced me to iNaturalist, he had a herpetology project up in Idaho, where he was collecting all the observations from iNaturalist, specifically within the boundaries of Idaho, so he could get a better sense of kind of what species are still present and more or less where they are. In this process, they had actually found a species of frog that had previously been thought to have been extirpated. So they didn't think it existed in Idaho anymore. And somebody was just out hiking around, said, oh, look, a frog. They took a picture, uploaded it, and instantly they realized that this species is actually not gone from Idaho, but it still exists, and so they're able to go out and have more attention to the right areas to go find where this frog still exists.
That makes sense.
If there are no other questions, thank you.
Thank you very much.